to the Ancestry of our English Bible, an account of the Bible versions, texts and manuscripts by Ira Maurice Price, PhD, Professor of the Semitic Languages and Literatures in the University of Chicago, USA. Published by the Sunday School Times Company, 1907. Copyright evidence. It doesn't seem to be a renewal record of copyright. It's usually after 1907, 50 years later, you have to renew that copyright. And there's no record of it, so there's no evidence of it copyrighted. But we found it in the public domain, public access, freely available. No copyright infringement was intentional, and we brought it to all via this video for educational purposes alone. We found that there is a gigantic review, like the last video we did. There was a massive content by a commentator, and it says, "Seek truth, find answers that count." In contrast to the myths and the errant Greek manuscripts that Nestle Arland used and persuaded others yearning for acceptance to use, see probably Gail Riplinger, and Westcott and Hort advocated the serious material and documentation of Gail Riplinger, who wrote about New Age Bible versions in her free videos. They should be mandatory for all those who call themselves followers of Christ, Jesus Christ, and also for those who aspire to truth or who are seeking accurate answers about the Bible, whether you agree with her or not. Truth, real, actual, outside of yourself, objective truth. God's truth has nothing to be afraid of. Some messages and facts are larger than the messenger, and this is true in Gail's case also. So if truth upsets you, or you are working for a spirit guide, then fall back asleep, but only at your own risk. There are forces that do not want you to wake up. They do not want you to think. They do not want you to ask questions. You are involved in spiritual warfare just by reading. I will not tell you that Gail is perfect, but who is? I would prefer a flawed human who actually wants to do what is right, who tries to do gurnal, whatever that is, what is right, and who is trying to catch up on history, manuscript, and fail, rather than be like most pew-warming false Christians, millions of whom are surely headed for a lake of fire while telling themselves that they are saved, offering not the slightest proof nor demonstration of this, who have no conscience, no understanding of the Bible, no ability to know, learn, or discern what is the theology of God versus what are false theologies. If you assert that you have the status of being regenerated or Christian, and you actually are not a Christian in the eyes and the evaluation of God, who actually does know your spiritual state, then the assertion does not make you a Christian. It simply means that your claims to be a Christian are part of your own self-deception. The New Testament refers to those hundreds of millions of people as being part of the great falling away. Be sure you know who you are trusting. The old debates used to be about Christianity versus other religions. Now the issue is about what kind of Christianity one has. And there is now much more occultism, spiritism, demon possession, far more plain demonic material, SRA, and much more false miracles, YouTube, false signs and wonders, and many people who are simply possessed, who are now simply part of their so-called counterfeit local congregations. They are also among those who will take a mark on their right hand or forehead soon enough, and they will also believe the soon arriving false Messiah. Well, he may have already turned up, if the claims that there's one in Israel at the moment could be the lead up to that false Messiah, the Antichrist, etc. According to Rabbi Tobias Singer on his Tanakh talk, he got emails saying that there was a Messiah there, it's been chained up. If that one fails in his mission, well, then he got a replacement. If he fails, he's got another one. Just continues like that. Yeah, this false Messiah rules from Rome, which is projected to be around 7 years. True Christians already know, as soon as you try to do what is right, as soon as you try to actually have a ministry, and especially if you are critical of other ministries which are false or anti-scriptural, biblical, etc., you can be sure that spiritual forces will be evident in your life to begin resisting what you are doing, to slow you down and to stop your work, your ministry, your effort, and any results you might have hoped for. Yeah, we've experienced that in our household. People just going hard at us as they played around with the demonic forces, etc. And they're clinging to them, and they try to give us crap all the time, mentally, physically, spiritually. This is why we are told to contend earnestly for the true faith. Gale is not that rare truth teller C. Cumby, nor as controversial as another Christian, K. Griggs, who tells the truth about leaders that Christians should have the courage to hear, nor quite as focused in her approach as the reliable historian Richard Bennett. However, the forces that Gale describes are real, their falsehoods are revealed here. Also, for example, the work of the apostate false translator Kittle, who admitted that he rejected the Old Testament and the claims of Jesus, and therefore the New Testament also. This could be the same commentator but under a different guise, different name. Okay, and he goes on and on and on. It's actually quite interesting. Okay, it's not as long as the other one, but yeah, pretty interesting. So we're going to get to this book, have a look at it. We did find some more information on this person, and this is the guide to the Ira M. Price papers 1875 to 1964. Descriptive summary: when she was born, when she died, repository, abstract. Ira Maurice Price, 1856 to 1939, was a founding faculty member of the University of Chicago, USA, serving as a professor of ancient languages and literatures from 1892 until 1925. Price was committed to religious education in the wider community as an active member of the Baptist Church and an author of popular histories of the Old Testament. The Ira M. Price papers include personal and professional correspondence, family papers, photographs, scrapbooks, teaching and research notes, and drafts of his scholarly and popular writing. So maybe he was Jewish. He had that name Ira. We actually thought it was a female, but no. Okay. Citation. When quoting material from this collection, the preferred citation is Price, Ira M. Papers, box number, folder number 1, Hannah Holborn, Gray Special Collections, Research Center, University of Chicago Library. Biographical note: he was born in Granville, Ohio. He came from a farming family, etc., etc. Scope note: the Ira M. Price papers span the years 1875 to 1964. They are organised into 4 series. Series 1, 2, 3, 4. Related resources, subject heading, inventory. Series 1, family. This series contains papers of the extended Price family from the 1880s through the 1960s. Particularly represented are Price's brother, Orlo Price, his wife Elizabeth Price, and his niece Florence Flossie Bateson. It includes correspondence, financial papers, photographs, glass lantern slides, and scrapbooks. Box 1. It's all there. Series 2, professional. This series contains material related to Price's academic career. It includes correspondence with other scholars and with colleagues at the Baptist Union Theological Seminary and the University of Chicago. Series 3, church organizations. The series documents Price's involvement with the Baptist Young People's Union of America and the International Sunday School Lesson Committee, of which he was secretary between 1908 and 1914. It includes Bible course materials, notes and clippings, and spans the years between 1892 and 1932. Series 6, research and writings. This series contains research notes, drafts, books, reviews, articles, and book manuscripts. This series is divided into 3 sub-series and spans 1880 to 1936. And there's a sub-series, research materials, translation of the Hebrew Book of Genesis, 1880 to 81. Notes on translations of the books of Judges, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, 1881. And it looks like Ethiopic something book, Voriter book, Voriter book. Notes on Hebrew manuscripts in the Cambridge Library, 1901, and so forth. Subseries 2, Leipzig Thesis Manuscript, 1881. Writing by others, American Czech Society, The Orphan Girl and Opening Blind Eyes, undated. Reverend Frederick Anderson, and Analysis of the Gospel of John, 1904. Maurice T. Price, Our Amateurishness in Promoting International Goodwill, 1935, and so forth. So that's a brief history of Ira M. Price and his papers from 1875 to 1964. Preface. Our English Bible is the descendant of a long line of ancestors. It is a gathering up, the focalization of the best that is found in all the manuscripts and versions extant. It is the result of the best efforts of about 75 of the leading scholars of the last quarter century. How did these scholars produce our English Bible? What were the sources of their material? Whence did they originate, or where did they originate from? What was the character of them? Where are they preserved? In what way did they make use of them in the production, for example, of our revised version? These are a few of the questions that arise in the minds of every earnest, thoughtful student of the Bible. They can be answered only by a somewhat extended description and by references to many books and articles. These questions were discussed in a popular vein in a series of 11 articles in the Sunday School Times during the first 3 quarters of the year 1904. Their publication in book form was announced for the autumn of the same year, but long, distressing and fatal illness in the family of the writer and the decision to expand the material to more than twice its original size necessitated the postponement of its publication. The purpose of this volume is to present in as concise and popular form as possible a description of the principal versions and texts of the Bible, from the earliest known translations and manuscripts down through the Middle Ages, even to modern times. Now and then a version or manuscript is prefaced by a statement of the historical background and where such is required to bring out more sharply the characteristics of such document. This has been done especially in the discussion of the early versions of the English Bible, for the Bible work is best understood if we appreciate the historical conditions of those days. The division of the book into 3 parts is natural, though it may at first seem to need justification. The earliest versions and manuscripts do not all contain both the Old Testament and New Testament. In fact, the originals of the two being written in different languages is sufficient ground for treating them in 2 parts. Then the existence of some versions, such as the Samaritan Pentateuch, in the Old Testament alone calls for such a division of the theme. It soon becomes apparent, however, that the line between parts 1 and 2 cannot always be sharply drawn, for as in the case of the Vulgate, both testaments are included. There is consequently some almost unavoidable overlapping, where the version is discussed both in parts 1 and 2. This disadvantage is partly overcome in the case of the Vulgate, Latin Vulgate, by devoting the chapter in part 1 to early Latin Old Testament manuscripts and the Vulgate down to the 9th century. In that in part 2 to early Latin New Testament manuscripts and the Vulgate down to modern times. In part 3, the English Bible, no division is made between the Old Testament and the New, both being treated under each chapter. Some portion of each chapter descriptive of a version is given to an account of the principal manuscripts. Only such facts are mentioned as serve prominently to distinguish those documents in the history of the text. Of some of the great manuscripts, such as Sinaitic, a few essential facts regarding its discovery are given, that we may the better know the cost of some of our most valued treasures. The illustrations are designed to set vividly before the eyes of the reader facsimile specimens of some of the earliest and most important texts and versions now in possession of the great libraries of the world and of some private collections. These have been gathered from a large variety of sources, as is indicated in the list of illustrations. Full acknowledgement is here made to the firms and individuals who have so generously granted permission to reproduce them for this volume. The names of such grantors appear in full in the list of illustrations. The bibliography gives merely a selection of the literature that will prove most helpful in further investigation of the theme of each chapter. The chronological table is intended to present only such dates as are essential and the best scheme for fastening outline facts regarding the Bible translations and texts. The diagrams illustrative of the relations of the versions and transcripts present to the eye some patent facts that should be remembered. The author acknowledged his indebtedness to many writers, etc., and gives thanks where it's needed. Ira Maurice Price, the University of Chicago, New Year 1987. And there's your contents page. parenthesis enclosed illustrations, chapter 1 through to there's quite a lot of chapters in this book, by the look of it. Okay, decided to be slow. Contents page continued. List of illustrations. Chapter 1. The English Bible and its marginal readings. 1. The English Bible holds a preeminent position in the world of religion and literature. For 3 centuries it has easily and gracefully occupied such a place among English-speaking peoples. Its power and influence today permeate every avenue of religious and literary life. Its increasing importance has required that it represents the best scholarship and the best statements of its truths for the popular mind of this day. Endeavours to answer these requirements have provided the author with more than one version of the English Bible. In fact, students and readers of the Holy Scriptures are confronted today with several editions or versions, translations, of the Bible, each claiming superior qualities of its own. The presence of these several versions is not an unmixed evil for most Bible readers. They rather confuse than illuminate the questions that touch the origin of the book. Some of the versions that lie all about us are found in every community. They are the Authorized or King James Version, the Revised Version of 1885, and the American Standard Revised Version of 1901. In addition to these, we find several translations and editions which are the products either of private enterprises or of Bible translation societies, such as the American Bible Translation Society, American Bible Society, and so forth. Some of these are Sparrow's, a translation of the Old Testament scriptures from the original Hebrew, Fenton's The Bible in Modern English, and the translations of the American Bible Union. Then there are some editions which have for their purpose the presentation of the Authorized or Revised Version in an improved literary form with introductions and notes. Notably, specimens of this kind of work are found in the Temple Bible, an arrangement of the Authorized Version, and Moulton's The Modern Reader's Bible, a literary distribution of the matter of the Revised Version of 1885. 2. An examination and comparison of these several versions point distinctly to the reason for their production. The translators of the Hebrew and Greek of the Old and New Testaments respectively into English had no small task. They were obliged to translate texts that had been copied over and over again by the hand of man for hundreds, and in the case of the Old Testament for thousands of years. There must inevitably have been mistakes by scribes and copyists that have never been corrected. No one of us could copy by hand 10 pages of manuscript without making some errors. We would at least forget to dot some I's and cross some T's, but most of us would leave out words, write some words twice, leave out some lines, repeat some lines, and make many other blunders that would cause our copy to vary from the original. Just these things have happened with the manuscripts of the Bible. Fortunately, at different periods in the history of Bible manuscripts, translations were made into other languages. Many of these translations, such as the Greek and Latin and Syriac, are now available for scholars. By the help we can often detect and locate an error in the Hebrew or Greek text, and thus give a better rendering into English of what we estimate was the original text. Such variations and helps are noted in the margins of our Revised Version, the author's revised, or our everyday Revised Version, right? And constitute a valuable source of aid in comprehending the real meaning of the original text or understanding it. 3. The quantity of these variations is sometimes alarming until one begins to understand the close relationship they sustain to a true conception of the text. As a rule, the more the marginal notes, the better a text is understood. They are a most welcome light to those of us who wish better to understand the meaning of some obscure passage in the text, and also an index to the industry of scholars in ascertaining the readings of the text when corrected by the various ancient translations. So that we should always regard with careful discrimination every marginal note if we are endeavouring to find out just what scholars have concluded as to the meaning of the text which we are reading or studying. These variant readings are not confined either to the Old or to the New Testament, but are found in every part of the Bible. A few examples may best illustrate this point. In Genesis 6:3 we find, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever." The margin reads, "For strive or rule in, for that he also is flesh." It has as its alternative in the margin, or in their going astray they are flesh. The margin then reads the verse in this way, "My spirit shall not rule in mankind forever, for in their going astray they have become flesh." Quite a different conception from that in the text, either of the authorized or the revised version, Genesis 40:19. "Until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the obedience of the peoples be," has a margin as follows, or till he come to Shiloh, having the obedience of the peoples. Again, in that passage that describes Samuel's first anointing of Saul, 1 Samuel 9:20, we find in the text, "And for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for thee, and for all thy father's house?" The margin reads, "Or on whom is all the desire of Israel? Is it not on thee, and on all," etc. That difficult passage in 2 Samuel 5:8 presents some interesting variations. "And David said on that day, Whoever shall smite the Jebusites, let him get up to the watercourse, and smite the lame and the blind, that are hated of David's soul." The margin reads, or, "And as for the lame and the blind that are hated of David's soul," another reading is, "that hates David's soul." The text goes on to say, "Wherefore they say, There are the blind and the lame, he cannot come into the house." The margin says, "Or the blind and the lame shall not come into the house." These margins show the variant translations of the revises of the original Hebrew describing this event. In Isaiah, there are many and striking variant readings. In chapter 8:20, we read, "If they speak not according to this word, surely there is no mourning for them." The margin says, "Or surely according to this word shall they speak, for whom there is no mourning." Isaiah 23:30 reads, "This people was not, the Assyrian founded it for them that dwell in the wilderness." The margin reads, "This people is no more, the Assyrian hath appointed it for the beast of the wilderness." Isaiah 49. "O thou that tellest good things, tidings to Jerusalem," margin, or "O Jerusalem that bringest good tidings." Isaiah 53:1. "Who hath believed our message?" Margin, for our message, or that which we have heard. 4. The New Testament carries on its margin scores of important variations in translation from that in the text, and it goes on about that, and the differences, and the margin, etc. And it keeps on going on about the margins and all this sort of stuff. Chapter 2, the basis of our present versions. The variety of the available marginal readings of our current versions of the English Bible point to several sources. We find references, 1, to variant readings of manuscripts, and 2, to several ancient versions, such as the Septuagint, the Syriac, and the Vulgate. These versions were translated at an early date, and hence were made from texts that were in existence from 15 to 2200 years ago. They thus form an important evidence to the original text as they exist in that far-off day. Our English Bible, with all its variants and readings, bases its best renderings and best sort, as we discover in its pages, upon at least 4 sources of supply. 1. The reconstructed original text found in our best printed editions of the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament. 2. The manuscripts of these testaments as either collated and published, or as preserved in various great libraries of the world. 3. The most important ancient versions, whose translations were made more than 1,000 years before the invention of printing. 4. Paraphrases and quotations from ancient authors, which may be valuable in the determination of some points of the text. And it continues. And there is the Codex Sinaiticus, 4th century, and it's Esther 1:15 to 2:14. A treatment of each individual version and its part in the work which culminated in our revised English Bible will be treated in succeeding chapters. Part 1, the Old Testament, Chapter 3, Hebrew Writing, Texts and Manuscripts. The Old Testament books were written in Hebrew, the language used by Israel during all the years of its existence as a nation in Egypt, the wilderness and in Palestine, stretching down into the centuries between the Old and the New Testament. Within these books, however, we find another language, a kind of degenerate Hebrew, employed in part by the Jews in the centuries immediately preceding and during the Christian era. This is called Biblical Aramaic, and is found as the language of Daniel 2:4 to 7:28, Ezra 4:8 to 6, 18:7, 12:26, and Jeremiah 10:11. A few words of this same tongue are found scattered here and there throughout the Hebrew Bible. The oldest specimen of biblical Hebrew writing of any considerable size that we possess today is either that of the St. Petersburg Codex of the Prophets, dated 916 AD, or a British Museum manuscript copy of the Pentateuch, which Ginsberg locates at least half a century earlier. According to S.A. Cook, the scrap which is figured in the frontispiece of this volume bears a palm for age. Both of these larger manuscripts are written in a so-called square character, similar to those found in our printed Hebrew Bibles. Prepared at that point in time, 916 AD, or even 50 years earlier, they represent the Hebrew script of at least 1,000 years after the youngest book of the Old Testament was put into writing. 1,000 years of multiplying books by the process of copying with the pen may introduce great changes in the character of the script. How many of us can read with ease English written documents of the 14th century? That would be Shakespeare's speak, wouldn't it? Where the F looks like the S is the F and all this sort of stuff. Very, very hard. Again, the Hebrew found in the rabbinical writings of the last 5 centuries differs quite materially from that in the Hebrew Bible and manuscripts. So there's a difference here, right? Every trace of the original manuscripts or rolls upon which Old Testament was written has totally disappeared. That Israel wrote down descriptions of events, bodies of laws, lyrical poems, etc. is certain from hints and direct references in the body of the Old Testament. The origin of the alphabet is as yet a conjecture, but its use from the time of Moses down to Judas Maccabeus is pretty definitely known today. There is no mention in all the books of Genesis of writing. Abraham, Genesis 23, bought the cave of Machpelah from Ephron the Hittite, but nothing is said of any written contract. The first mention of writing in the Old Testament is in Exodus 17:14, where Moses is commanded to write down in a book an account of Israel's victory over Amalek. In Exodus 24:7, Moses reads in the audience of the people the book of the covenant. That is the laws contained in Exodus 20-23. Very soon thereafter, he goes into the mount to receive the 2 stone tablets upon which the law has been inscribed. Thereafter, we find frequent references to writing as a means of preserving records of events. In Jeremiah 32:9-15, we find that a deed for property was drawn up in 2 forms, one sealed and one open. Both of these documents, which may have been made of clay, as they were in Babylonia, were deposited in a jar for future reference. There is frequent mention, however, of certain classes who were skilled in writing. With all these Old Testament references to writing and writers, we do not possess a single Old Testament document in its original form. Not too sure on that one. If you have the original ancient, very old Tab Asherit manuscripts from 800 BCE, which were hand copied by amongst the scribes in Ur, we're kind of doubtful on that one. There was writing too, long centuries prior to Moses, among the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Susians, the Assyrians, the Hittites, and other contemporaneous peoples. And we possess great quantities of the literary products stretching back almost, if not quite, to 5000 BC. It is entirely reasonable to expect that among the remnants of ancient Oriental writing we should find some scripts of Old Hebrew. In this we are not disappointed. In 1868 there was found east of the Jordan at the site of ancient Dibon, the now famous Moabite stone. Its fragments are now put together and it stands in Louvre in Paris. It carried on its surface 34 lines written in the Phoenician or Archaic Hebrew of about 860 BC. When this work was probably executed, it is the oldest dated Hebrew document known today, for its issuer was Mesha, king of Moab, mentioned in 2 Kings 1:1 and 3:4. It was rudely cut on a hard stone. Several lion weights found at Nineveh and dating from the latter part of the 8th century BC also carry Phoenician and Assyrian characters. So their language, Hebrew and the Aramaic, is, by the looks of it, Phoenician related, from the Phoenicians. To bring the case closer home, an inscription in similar character was found in Jerusalem in 1880, cut in the wall of the tunnel connecting the pool of Siloam with St. Mary's Well. This short 6-line inscription is written in elegant Hebrew, a little more artistic in form than the Moabite stone. It is thought to date from Hezekiah's reign, where a conduit, probably the same one, was constructed. 2 Kings 20:20, 2 Chronicles 32:30, Ecclesiasticus 48:17. These 2 inscriptions are the best known examples of the written language of the children of Israel and their neighbours in Moab during the regal period, that period when writing was prevalent among the prophets and court officials. Samples of the Hebrew and Phoenician of the 4th century BC, for example the carpentras stelae found in Egypt of the first 3 Christian centuries in the Palmyrenian form, show the tendency of the letters of the alphabet to change as the centuries slide by. Well, they evolved, didn't they? The oldest Hebrew inscription in a square character, such as we have seen in the oldest Hebrew manuscript, is found in a short inscription in the cave at Arak al-Amir near Heshbon, which was used as a place of retreat in 176 BC. A few other fragments and coins distributed over a couple of later centuries show us how the letters gradually moved towards the later square character. It is probable that books of the Old Testament were written in the same kind of script that we find in the Moabite stone. The destruction of Jerusalem by Titus in 70 AD was the third disaster at that place that threatened the life of the Old Testament. On the authority of the law of the Babylonian Talmud, Titus destroyed copies of the law. It's the source. Okay, that states Titus ordered copies to be destroyed of that Torah, of that Babylonian, that law, Jewish law, right? Josephus, Wars 5:5-7, that's Wars of the Jews probably, states that one single copy of the law occupied a prominent place in the victory over Vespasian. This is the earliest mentioned manuscript of the Old Testament and was said to have just 32 variations from the received text. This document was later deposited in the Royal Library at Rome and later in 220 AD was handed over to the synagogue of Severus, probably by the emperor who was a good friend to the Jews. These perils to the manuscript of the Old Testament did probably extinguish many of the stories of some of the books. For we find today mentioned in the book of the Old Testament now extant the names and titles of 24 books that have perished. By far the largest number of these is found in Kings and Chronicles. It is not impossible that some of these works, if existent, will be found in our Bible, but they were probably blotted out by the dire disasters that befell Jerusalem and the Jews between 600 BC and AD 100. The alphabet of the Hebrew language is made up of 22 letters or consonants. So they're all consonants. 4 of these are called vowel letters, for their presence indicated the use of a certain vowel sound in the pronunciation of a word. On the Moabite stone and the Siloam inscription, the individual words are separated by a small point. This is found also between the words of the Samaritan Pentateuch, and so forth. The unintentional changes are the more numerous. Scholars have practically agreed on this classification. 1. Because of failure to see the sense of the passage as where words were incorrectly divided. A good example is found in Amos 6:12. Shall horses run upon the rock? Will one plough there with oxen? The word for oxen should doubtless be divided in 2 words, and then it will be read, do men plough the sea with oxen? Another good illustration is Psalm 73:4. For there are no pangs in their death, but their strength is firm. Simply by separating the word translated in their death, we can translate, for they have no pangs, sound and firm in their strength, a meaning that better fits to both this thought in the context and the parallelism. 2. Errors due to the eye. A. Repetitions in Leviticus 20:10 omit the 5 words repeated. 1 Chronicles 9:35-44 has been repeated, doubtless through an error. From 1 Chronicles 8:29-38. B. Omissions, as we in Proverbs 10:10b. The omission is made up from verse 8b, but the Septuagint and the Syriac read for 1:10b. He that rebuketh boldly is peacemaker, etc., etc. And you have errors of memory. These may be occasioned by the fact that the copyist sometimes carried in his mind the thought rather than the exact words of what he was copying. In such a case, he would be apt to use synonyms or nearly such in place of the word contained in the original. As an example of this, Jehoiakim and Jeremiah 27, I should be Zedekiah, as in verse 3. Errors due to carelessness or ignorance. Of this type there are many examples. In 1 Samuel 13:1, we find Saul was years old. Some copiers carelessly neglected to put down the number. In 2 Samuel 3:7, Bosh, Eth is missing, but is found here in the Septuagint, Syriac and Vulgate. 2 Samuel 2:21 has Jerubbaal, a careless writing of for Jerubbaal. Judges 6:32, and so forth. Such errors as the ones above, the ones mentioned, crept into the text gradually and were transmitted by copiers from one manuscript to another continuously down through the centuries. As a prevention against further errors, the scribes counted the number of verses, though they were not yet formally numbered, and even letters in the various books, and then made note of the middle verse, the middle word, and the middle letter of each book. These are found at the end of each book in our Hebrew Bibles today. The middle verse of the Pentateuch is Leviticus 8:7. The middle verse of Joshua is chapter 13:26. Of Judges chapter 10-8. The middle verse of the Hebrew Bible is Jeremiah 6:7. If a scribe, after he had finished his work, could not make his count tally with these notations, there was some error in his copy of the manuscript, which must either be corrected or his copy discarded, thrown away, put in the rubbish bin. The Hebrews classified the books of the Old Testament under three heads. 1. The Law, consisting of the first 5 books, or the Pentateuch. 2. The Prophets, subdivided into A. The earliest prophets, consisting of 4 books, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. B. The latter prophets, containing 4 books, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and the 12, 1 book. 3. The Hagiographa, containing 11 books, Ruth, Psalms, Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Lamentations, Daniel, Esther, Ezra, including Nehemiah, and Chronicles. Of these, the 5 roles so often mentioned are Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Esther. The whole number, according to the Jewish reckoning, was therefore 24 books. Josephus and some others, by combining Ruth with Judges and Lamentations with Jeremiah, made them 22, the same in number as the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Then the law, after the exile at least, was arranged to be read in regular course. In Acts 15:21, we read that Moses from generations of old hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath. This custom has continued to the present day. In Palestine, it was read through in 3.5 years. To facilitate this plan, the law was early divided into sections called parashas. There are now 54 of these sections or paragraphs found in Hebrew manuscripts and printed texts, and since the 14th century, an annual reading of the whole law has become universal among the Jews. After the law was read in the synagogue, a corresponding or appropriate passage was read from the prophets. An example of this is seen in the synagogue at Nazareth, Luke 4:17f, when Jesus read from the prophet Isaiah 61:1f. But the sections into which the prophets were divided are not definitely known.